Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Careers and Coffee. I am Kaylee and I'm going to be your host for today's show with my colleague Kieran Buxton doing tech behind the scenes today. Today we have Ben Scarlett on to talk about his role as a station manager at IO Radio and why supporting the community is important along with his varied career journey. So let's welcome Ben. Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us today.
You're welcome.
So, to kick it off, Ben, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, good start. So I'm Ben and I am the station manager at IO Radio, which is part of Ipswich Community Media, just based on South Street, kind of central town area. So that's me and that's what I do. I am the station manager to run the kind of oversee the radio station part of that organization.
Awesome. Okay. So can you give us an overview of your working day as a station manager? And I know not every day is the same, but yeah, just sort of your average day.
Yeah, it's quite tricky to kind of nail down an average day because I'd say there's such variance in what you're potentially doing every day. You don't really kind of have normal days. You have more kind of normal tasks that you try and fit in around the other kind of stuff that you're doing. But some of the kind of main tasks that we do are obviously uploading content to our various platforms to be shared and consumed. We do one-to-one sessions with young people, with people from disadvantaged backgrounds, with kids with learning difficulties, etc. So we teach them the kind of practice of making radio and production of radio. We do a lot of social media kind of around sort of digital skills as well and kind of developing platforms that people can kind of feel empowered to use themselves. Those are kind of some of the core tasks. So for me personally, there's a kind of a push to kind of make the platform a little bit bigger, I guess, and kind of bring in some new faces and new parts of the community that maybe haven't been heard from before. So a lot of the kind of stuff that I'm doing at the moment is meeting with other agencies, other organizations, other charities, local groups, and just seeing whether or not there's an appetite for them to kind of create more content for us that we can then showcase and help them get out there, really.
That sounds amazing. It sounds really exciting as well and really, really interesting. And so what is IO Radio and what makes IO Radio different to maybe other radio stations?
So IO Radio has existed for about 5 years as part of Ipswich Community Media, which is the larger, wider charity. What makes IO Radio different, I suppose, is that kind of one-to-one, that kind of tutoring, targeting people from disadvantaged communities and groups that don't necessarily always have access to kind of media opportunities, I suppose. So there's a kind of emphasis there. We're also a digital platform primarily. So whereas your traditional community radio might have an FM license and work out of a kind of more conventional studio, primarily we're a digital platform. So you can go onto ioradio.co.uk and you can listen to our shows. We upload them to other platforms as well so that people can listen after or listen on demand, as I'm sure you know that there's quite a clamour for that at the moment, to kind of try and do stuff a little bit more on demand or when you want to do it. So we produce stuff that will then go on other platforms that we can then share, sort of Mixcloud, SoundCloud, that kind of thing. But yeah, what differentiates us, I guess, is the kind of the organisation that we're part of. Ipswich Community Media has a kind of hand in various other areas as well, including ESOL, and works with some of the kind of poorest and most marginalised communities. So we try and incorporate that into the work that we do and the content that we produce, and in addition to the kind of digital side of things.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we're going to come back as well to kind of discuss that community side of it as well. But obviously within a radio station, there are many different roles, and those watching may think that for a radio station, it's just the producer or maybe a DJ or presenter that's there. But actually, what are some of the different roles that are needed to help run a radio station?
Well, as you mentioned, obviously you've got the kind of front-facing roles. So you've got your presenter, your DJ, your producer, potentially behind the scenes, kind of making sure everything's running smoothly and making sure that everything's on time. But then we've also got a studio assistant role, someone who can come in and do a little bit more of the tech focused stuff. We have an actual tech support person who, is very proficient in audio technology and digital technology and kind of developing the platform for us and how we kind of move forward. We have a couple of tutors that do one-to-one sessions with individuals and kind of, geared towards, developing those skills and developing, new people that we can then focus on the radio. And also social media. So we do, quite a lot on social media, or have done historically. And we always need someone to kind of oversee that, coordinate that, potentially make content for us that we can then utilize on social media. I would say those are the main roles. We primarily use like a kind of volunteer base to create our content. So our DJs and our presenters tend to be volunteers. They will tend to make a show based on a subject or an area that they're enthusiastic about. And we then develop that and help them to develop the skills to kind of make it a bit more kind of professional and sound like a conventional radio station, really.
Awesome. You mentioned the station about the passion that individual has. So what are some of the themes of some of the shows that you have on IO Radio?
I mean, historically, we've had loads of stuff. So we've had kind of various music genres that maybe, your conventional radio stations won't necessarily play. So we've got a salsa show. We've got a gap year show, which is all about kind of global music, those kind of things. We've got people that have made shows primarily out of like sort of computer game soundtracks, video game soundtracks. That's their interest, and they've kind of developed a show around that. Two of our newest shows are kind of more multi-genre music shows. We have shows that are about empowerment, shows that are about kind of community with a community focus, things that kind of a more conventional kind of magazine show that essentially kind of talks about the topics that are, national news and kind of assesses those every week. So yeah, we've got tons of shows, to be honest, and tons of different. We're really kind of open about working with someone to identify a show, and the more kind of niche and the more kind of different it is, then the more we're probably likely to kind of really want to work with someone to kind of develop that further. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of general feel of the schedule at the moment. Some kind of shows around empowerment and making like well-being and things like that. We would also, have in the past and will continue to kind of work with community groups who want to showcase a project or, something that they're doing in the community at the moment. And I think that's really important as well, to kind of spread the news of things that are going on around the town and around the local area. So they all kind of, that's probably a lot of information, but they all kind of fall into the kind of IO part essentially.
Yeah, I just think it sounds fascinating, and it sounds like such a great opportunity to be a part of as well.
Yeah,
we're gonna kind of steer away, and we're gonna come back to IO Radio and working with the community as well. But I know in the description you mentioned that your career path has been unconventional. So could you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you've come to be where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of, went to, conventional school, went to a local school, did high school GCSEs, and then went on to sixth form to do my A-levels. I kind of had an enthusiasm for media, and that was one of my A-levels, and I did reasonably well at that. But then kind of felt, that I didn't necessarily want to go to university straight away. It wasn't the right time for me, and I kind of gravitated towards work and going out and earning some money. So I kind of did some, I wouldn't say like mundane jobs, but jobs that weren't necessarily geared towards what I would want to do long term with my life. Worked for kind of an insurance company for quite a few years, and then kind of just a call center, and just worked out what I really wanted to do. Then went into the kind of public sector. So worked in a kind of admin role for a public sector organization for a while. And it was really that kind of, reignited my passion, because I was lucky to have a really supportive manager. And I'd had, discussions that I didn't, necessarily think that my career path was staying in the public sector forever, or kind of, going down that conventional route. She encouraged me to, explore kind of academic opportunities. So I went down to the local university and got really lucky. They had a place on the media course that started in about months later, and they kind of took me on. They took a risk, I think, a little bit, because they had no information about me, but, they were happy to do that. And we kind of hustled through a UCAS application and did that, and then So then I did that alongside still working in the public sector. So I was kind of studying full time at the same time as trying to work as well. Got to the end of that, finished my degree, kind of worked a little bit in and around media opportunities, kind of in work experience. I think, the common perception of media is that it can be hard to break into. And I did find that as well, especially in kind of non-London centric or, the big cities, the opportunities are limited or can be limited. I think it's much better now, but it was, when I was looking. So I kind of went and did some work experience for record labels, worked in London for a bit, and then kind of came back to my public sector job because I wasn't sure that it was, necessarily something that I could achieve. Stayed in the public sector, but also always had a kind of enthusiasm for media and creating content and those kind of things, and did more of that as a kind of hobby almost, really, I suppose. I kind of ran kind of nights out of kind of club nights out of local venues and things like that to keep my enthusiasm up and my passion for it. Worked for a public sector organization that actually gave me some freedom to be a bit flexible with what I kind of did with the people that I worked with the beneficiaries and things like that. That really kind of, like I say, reignited my passion for it. So I'd kind of stuck with it, but not in a professional capacity. And then I got the opportunity, saw this role and felt like it was actually kind of a good kind of combination of the skills that I'd learned and through the public sector, working with people from difficult backgrounds sometimes and from difficult circumstances, but also had the media experience that I'd done independently, and was able to bring that forward and kind of combine the things into this role, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it just shows that, you don't always go straight into that dream role that you want. Sometimes you do take detours, but actually you learn a lot along the way on those detours as well. And you mentioned about skills. And so how do you feel the other roles that you've done help to develop your skills for the job that you're doing now?
I mean, I think the main thing for me was probably developing the ability to kind of communicate with different people, so people from different walks of life. So my last role prior to stepping into this one was working with kids from not very nice backgrounds that had previous kind of difficulties growing up, etc. And I think you have to develop skills as to how to communicate with that audience. And I do think that's something that you can take into kind of radio as well, because you work with a range of different people. We especially work with a kind of host of different audiences, and it's that key skill, being able to communicate with those audiences in a way that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like, I don't know, patronized or talked down to or whatever, and having that ability. So for me, it was probably kind of relationship building and communication, I think, are the two strongest things that I took from that, but also maybe an enthusiasm for working with groups that have been underrepresented historically. I think that's the other part of it. There's a track record of that, and IO still kind of caters to that and still kind of fulfills that for me. So those are the main things I would say.
Amazing. And like you've mentioned, you work with groups within the community. Can you give some of your highlights, maybe some of the programs that you've done, or any highlights that you can think about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of projects that are ongoing at the moment that I can't say too much about, but they've been real highlights. So that's a little bit disappointing that I can't go into much more detail. But we have just recently finished a project with the college, a kind of lighter project where we provided them with a brief in terms of them creating some content of themselves for themselves using the college kind of facilities, and that was has worked really well. I mean, we've ended up with quite a lot of content that I think we could potentially turn into something more, and it could develop more like down the line, and maybe bring into IO in a more kind of professional capacity. But any times I get the opportunity to kind of work with groups is a real highlight for me.
Amazing. And we've just had a live question come in as well, which links quite nicely with the one that you've just answered, actually. But what have been the highs of your career?
I mean, with IO, it's been just in general, just kind of collaborating with everyone. Like there's a lot of access to communities that previously, like I said, haven't been represented, and that's the key for me in increasing kind of opportunities for marginalised communities has been a massive highlight for me. We're still massively working towards that, and we're not nowhere near kind of done. But the idea of kind of showcasing different voices that haven't been heard before is absolutely the kind of key thing for me. Previously to that, in my previous employment history, I think just working with again, it's kind of all underrepresented groups, but I kind of worked with a specific cohort of refugees that I actually found really rewarding. And that, you know, they've settled and kind of made their lives over here now. And that was, you know, a real highlight for me, working with some of those people and building up those relationships and continuing those relationships. And hopefully we're going to try and bring some of them into IO as well. So trying to continue to cultivate that and just develop those voices as well.
Oh, amazing. Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. And following on from that question, so obviously speaking about some of the highs, actually, what challenges have you had, but actually how do you feel overcoming them has helped to kind of help you develop, maybe professionally or personally?
I mean, I think the most biggest recent challenge is probably the most obvious challenge, and it's been the challenge that everyone's had to face, which is, you know, the current climate and the pandemic and things like that. Because obviously we were limited in terms of our access to the studio. So prior to me coming on board, they'd actually developed a process by which they can allow our volunteers and our beneficiaries to remote record, so record from home. And that kind of mimics the studio experience in a way, digitally, of course, but you know, I think that's a massive thing that we've managed to be able to overcome, because I don't know if we could run a schedule without that, and without people having the capacity to record at their own leisure, you know, at home, and for it also to mimic that studio experience, because, you know, the feedback has been overwhelming that people do miss that kind of conventional studio experience. So we've kind of had to think on our feet a little bit and come up with a solution, and I think we've done all right with that so far.
Yeah, definitely sounds it. And we've just got another live question come through. So how do you select what music you want to play?
That's a really good question. There's a kind of couple of schools of thought on that. So, I mean, for us, it depends on the show. I mean, if it's someone who comes in with their own kind of ideas, they tend to source and identify the music themselves. Obviously, it has to adhere to certain radio guidelines, because we're still a radio station, so we still have Ofcom guidelines and things like that. But for us as a radio station, I think we choose stuff that maybe is a little bit outside of the norm, that isn't going to get played on your conventional Radio 1, for example, in the middle of the day. We would try and gravitate towards stuff that's a little bit more niche, based on, I guess, our kind of collective tastes, really. But also, you know, what our volunteers and people that have maybe inexperienced in radio, what they want to play as well. So we have an A list and a B list that we, you know, update periodically. And that tends to be a mix of, you know, kind of popular stuff that would appeal to people, you know, maybe coming in for the first time, and other kind of more niche genres and more niche kind of tracks that are maybe alternative, but also local as well. You know, there's a big emphasis on local music. So if someone, you know, is making, you know, amazing records in their own kind of time or whatever, then by all means send them to us, and we will feature them on our playlist where we can.
That's awesome. Sounds like they've just got a lot of creative freedom there as well, which is great.
Yeah, definitely.
And why do you feel it's important to give back to the community? So I know IO Radio do a lot of this, but yeah, why is it important to give back to the community?
Well, I think it's just about opening doors, really. Like, you know, it's opening doors to an industry that historically has always been a bit guarded, has always been difficult to break into. I think from our perspective, we would like more diverse voices in media in general. I think that's a big point of emphasis for us. So we kind of, it's all based around that, essentially. It's about promoting voices and seeing what we can do to kind of increase inclusivity in, that's hard to say, increase inclusivity in the media in general. And that's just our general remit, and that's what we've always been aiming towards.
Awesome. Yeah. We've got another question that has come through as well. So how do you decide what groups you want to collaborate with?
That usually starts with I will either approach someone or someone will approach me. But in terms of how we choose, I guess anyone who's got, you know, most people have some sort of, you know, interesting story or some aspect that would be interesting for radio to explore. It's about whether or not, you know, they have the skills and what we need to do to upskill them, essentially. So we wouldn't necessarily exclude anyone. we would always be open to anyone having a conversation, and we look to see if we can develop something that's more sustainable long term out of that. Sometimes people come to us with a fully formed idea about what they want to present. An example is there's a Future Female Society as one of our partnership organisations. So we are currently working with them to see if we can develop a kind of future female centric show. So it isn't, I wouldn't say we necessarily decide, and certainly we don't think about it in those kind of ways where we want to be like, gatekeepers, and we're like, actually these people are not going to have a show. Usually someone would meet with me or meet with a colleague. We would have a discussion about what they want to get out of it, what they want to achieve. And we would do everything we can to support that, really.
Awesome. And speaking about Future Female Society, we had Alicia actually on the show, who I know collaborates with Future Female Society as well. Okay, so another question. These are some great questions coming in. Yeah. So do you see radio as continuing, or do you think media will move more towards streaming and podcasts? So how do you compete and keep it fresh? Great question. Amazing
question. And something that has been in my thinking since I started day one, I think. It's a tricky one, because I think conventional radio has its pros and cons like anything else. I do think there is a shift towards kind of on-demand content, as I said, people being able to kind of pick up a podcast at their leisure, not having to kind of tune into a show at a specific time, get the radio up and etc. I think there's space for both, because I think what differentiates a conventional radio station is that you do have that schedule where maybe you want some background listening, or you want something specific, or you don't necessarily want to know what it is that you're kind of identifying. You just want to stumble upon something. Radio will always exist in that capacity for that. But yes, I do think in general media is moving towards streaming, on demand, podcasts especially. The podcast market is massive and booming, and will probably continue in that way, because it identifies things that people like to hear about, and niches that people haven't necessarily historically heard about. There's true crime podcasts, for example, health podcasts, empowerment podcasts, well-being, those kind of things, haven't necessarily had a conventional home on radio. So I think there's always kind of scope for podcasts to exist, and I do see the kind of platform shifting. I think we would like to definitely do more podcasts, and we are kind of trying to develop our platform to be able to act as a home for more podcasts and more niche content as well. But in reality, there probably isn't that much difference between the two kind of areas. It's just about how you consume them, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah, awesome. It's great to hear about the podcast, because somebody watching might have a great idea for one and want to contact you, which should be
absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to hear from them.
Yeah. So final question. It's the information you've given so far has been amazing. So if anyone was interested in volunteering at IO Radio, how would they go about doing this?
So the primary way, there's a kind of box on our website where you can go onto ioradio.co.uk and you can submit a question. But I would say the easiest way is just to email the main mailbox, which is info@ioradio.co.uk. 90% of those emails come through to me. So then I would probably get in touch with the person, and we just maybe arrange like a Zoom or a quick call and have a kind of chat about what they want to achieve, and we would go from there. But yeah, info@ioradio.co.uk is probably the best way to get hold of me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been great having you on today, Ben. And thank you for sharing all that information with us about what you do at IO Radio, but also your career journey as well. You're giving some sort of key nuggets of wisdom there. So that's brilliant. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great. And, like I say, if anyone, feels motivated by this to kind of contact us and volunteer, we'd be happy to hear from them.
Amazing. Thank you. So thank you again for Ben for coming on today, but also for my colleague Kieran for doing the tech side today. We look forward to seeing you again on Thursday at 4:30 and hope you have a lovely afternoon.